It's the most beautiful place I've ever been in all my life.
I really appreciate being here, being able to work under Father's direction.
How long would you like to stay?
Forever.
Jim Jones became a control freak, a tyrant, a liar.
It was an emotional breakdown.
People's Temple didn't start that way. It was a slow evolving into what it became in the end.
Nightmare. Nightmare.
A place of paradise that became a hell for hundreds of people who'd put their faith in him.
It's the late 1960s. The United States is a country in turmoil. The generation gap emerges as the youth of America voices fierce opposition to the Vietnam War and demands civil rights, gender equality, and social change. The sexual revolution is in full swing. In this time of great upheaval, influential figures step in to lead counterculture movements. A dynamic leader named Jim Jones offers wide-ranging solutions that strike a chord with many of these disaffected young people. Jones seems to really understand their pressing concerns.
I had never seen a pastor that was cursing out of the pulpit. I just had never seen that. But even though I thought he was an entertainer, he was very interesting. I felt enthusiastic about some of the things that he said, and he was charismatic.
His message is more than just religious. Jones preaches a more egalitarian society where all are included, regardless of race, gender, or social class.
I had always been involved and interested in leftist movements, in anything that was progressive. Since I was estranged from my family, the church became my family. They became my support.
I became my own brand of Marxist. Scratch-looking in the childhood. Would I could talk as well as I think. That's presumptuous, but thoughts move rapidly through the mind. It was difficult to capture them, to type them, to verbalize them.
Jim Jones was born on May 13, 1931, in the tiny town of Crete, Indiana. As an only child, he spends a lot of time alone, wandering the streets of his small town. But one day, a neighbor woman takes him to the church. This becomes the turning point in Jones' life.
So he fell in love with this idea of becoming a preacher. And while other kids would play doctor and patient or school, Jim Jones would start playing preacher and congregant with his buddies.
While still a teenager, his parents divorce and Jones moved with his mother to Richmond, Indiana, a racially segregated city. And Jim Jones decides to take a stand against this injustice.
He would stand out on a street corner and preach this message to African Americans who were passing by. So he was able to adopt this message from the Bible about equality and Christian inclusion and all are welcome, and find a ready crowd of listeners who wanted to hear this.
In 1949, when Jim Jones is just 18, he marries Marceline Baldwin. And 2 years later, the couple moved to Indianapolis, where Jones attends meetings of the local chapter of the Communist Party, and he embraces the ideals of Marxism.
I decided, how can I demonstrate my Marxism? The thought was, infiltrate the church.
Jones soon becomes a student minister at a local Methodist church. He starts inviting black families to attend Sunday services, a move that shocks the members of the all-white congregation.
He was essentially ousted and told that this was not okay. It's all fine and good for white worshipers or white believers to say that they believe in equality, but it was another thing for them to stand side by side with black Christians and believers sharing a Bible or a hymnal. So what did he do? He decided to create his own church where all were welcome.
In 1954, Jones establishes the Community Unity Church and encourages all races to attend his services. Around this time, Jones witnesses a faith healing service at a Seventh-day Adventist Baptist church. He sees how faith healing attracts people and their money. Motivated by this income, he brings this practice into his services.
I became a member, of course, of the choir. I joined the church. I would go out on Saturdays like a dutiful little member of People's Temple with a can. I would stand on corners, go to neighbors in the area that we lived in San Francisco, begging for donations to support the ministry of People's Temple. There were hundreds of us doing the same thing all over San Francisco. It was being reduplicated in Los Angeles. It was being duplicated in Redwood Valley. Anywhere, anyone who came in contact with People's Temple that ultimately became a member felt that that was one of their areas of responsibility.
Jones and his wife set an example for the congregation by adopting multiracial children, calling themselves the Rainbow Family. The racial backlash against him is intense. Undaunted, Jones renames his church the People's Temple and expands his community activities. He opens a soup kitchen and organizes clothing distribution for the needy. Jim Jones starts to get positive media attention. They view him as a civil rights leader in turbulent times.
He could speak to anyone. When he could speak to a revolutionary and say, we can change the world, and he could speak to an atheist and say, you don't have to believe in God, whatever he spoke about with the power and passion that he did it with inspired everyone and would make people just clap and sing and shout and joyful. It was an amazing experience.
But despite his growing success, everything changes for Jim Jones when he receives a terrifying vision. At a time when segregation has many Americans feeling excluded and oppressed, a young, charismatic religious leader named Jim Jones brings a message of hope. He founds the People's Temple, a rapidly growing movement who stands for a fair society where all people can live as equals, regardless of race, gender, or class, challenging the dominant prejudices that still divide society in the 1950s and 60s. Becoming not only a successful preacher, but also a praised human rights activist. The Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union is escalating, a conflict that has a deep effect on Jones, causing him to experience terrifying nightmares.
And in 1965, he told people that he had a vision that a bomb was going to fall on the Midwest and that they had to get out.
Jones and 140 of his congregants pack up and travel in a caravan of cars from Indiana to Redwood Valley, California.
The real story behind that move is he is trying to figure out who really believes in his message.
The People's Temple establishes a socialist-style commune. Their message resonates with Californians, and they are soon joined by new congregants from all over the state. These new members are asked to dedicate most of their free time to working for the community.
I started doing security at night, even while I was pregnant. There was letter writing campaigns. At night, it might go into the wee hours of the morning, and you had to go to school. I remember taking notos all night long because I had a chemistry test the next day and I knew I couldn't go to sleep. And so that's the stress that we were under, making sure that we performed and making Jim happy.
Another measure to support their socialist ideals is the sharing of wealth. Members are encouraged to not only donate their savings, but also their entire salaries to the Common Temple Fund.
I saw most people who lived communally giving their entire checks, and then they were given $5 a week. They would bring peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch on a regular basis. And then towards the end of the week, when they would go to a church service, they would be begged to no end out of their $5. So then they wouldn't have any money.
Members are also expected to share or sell their goods and property, with the proceeds going to the church.
The dream, or the cause, was to provide a different reality, a positive community building experience where everybody could be a part of and experience life more fully. And it wouldn't matter if you were young or old, or if you'd had money or you didn't have money.
Jones establishes Wednesday night catharsis sessions, where members are called out in front of the group for not willingly participating in the plan. Eventually, they are punished.
Oftentimes their punishment would be they would be hit with the paddle, the Board of Education as they called it, a big wooden paddle. And you'd watch them get spanked. It would be children, it would be adults, it would be older folks, younger folks. It made no difference.
They were being enemies of the people, enemies of the cause, and that so they were being punished to kind of put people back in line. And so that was normalized.
I remember my first day of junior high school, and I was talking to this girl, and this young girl comes over and she says, "Are you from People's Temple?" And I said, "Yes, I go to People's Temple." She goes, "Well, you can't talk to any other kids but Temple kids." So I thought that was my first introduction of the beginning of isolation.
You know, it was a very isolated mentality. It's us versus them. It's very black and white thinking. You're either a friend or you're an enemy. You're a friend or a foe. There's no in between.
Jim Jones' utopia is developing according to plan, but he craves more power and decides to expand further. He determines he needs to be in a larger city, so the congregation moves its headquarters into a former Masonic temple in San Francisco. They establish a significant following in this city, as well as in a branch in Los Angeles. Jim Jones is constantly on the move, often touring nationally. Yet he never shows any signs of fatigue. His speeches are always wildly energetic.
So one day on a bus trip from San Francisco to LA, one of his disciples, one of his close associates, went into the bathroom in the bus and saw Jim Jones's toiletry bag, and inside there was a vial of speed. That's where his stamina came from. He was high on speed.
Jones' drug use increases. He also starts to have affairs with both the women and men in the congregation.
And then oftentimes, to make sure that he kept the husband and the wife in alignment, he would sleep with other people's mates and whatnot. And he would always say he had to do it for the cause, because they were getting ready to leave the church, and he had to find some way to make them feel obligated to stay and work for the cause.
On the outward face of things, he looked progressive. He had this message of inclusion, of equality, of social justice. And as he drew more and more African Americans to his church, some of the young people noticed certain things.
Members start to defect, and Jones becomes more paranoid and manipulative. Cult leaders offer followers the message they want to hear. But once they get the loyalty of their members, they become controlling and abusive. One of Jones' key strategies is to keep his members in line in order to create a climate of external threat by simulating attacks. One Sunday morning, while leaving the church after services, congregants are shocked by the sound of gunshots.
They bring him out and people are crying and gathering around. And what happens? He heals himself because he's becoming God.
Another insidious form of manipulation is the requirement that anyone over the age of 12 must sign a blank piece of paper. These signed papers can later be filled out to incriminate them in offenses they haven't committed.
And you did it because you did not want to be the member in the church that refused to do it and be brought up front and center on the stage and be ostracized, be beaten up, or maybe excommunicated.
By this time, Jim Jones starts speaking more and more of unconditional loyalty to the temple, inciting his followers to be willing to give their lives for the socialist cause. And he devises cruel methods to test their loyalty.
Then one day, we had come up from eating our communal dinner downstairs, and he asked us if we all enjoyed our meals, and we said, yeah. And then he said, well, that's good, because this is going to be the last one. We're going to die together.
According to Jones, the meal was poisoned.
And after a few minutes, he laughed, and he said, no, I didn't do that. He said, I just wanted to see which ones of you were really loyal and committed to the cause.
Like any good manipulator, Jim Jones always knew how to show his followers his softer side.
There was this side that you saw, which is what people fell in love with, I believe. It's like an abusive relationship. And then all of a sudden you see the sadistic part and you wonder, okay, well, I must have done something wrong.
The congregation keeps growing, becoming an influential voting bloc in the state of California. In 1975, local politicians court the movement for local elections. The temple endorses the campaigns of George Moscone for mayor, Harvey Milk for councilman, and Joseph Freitas for district attorney.
And then on election day, some of them actually cross voting lines and vote for these candidates. He gets his slate elected. And as a reward, George Moscone, the new mayor, appoints him to the housing authority.
Jones' notoriety also attracts some unwanted attention. A private citizen named David Kahn has several acquaintances among former temple members. Based on their troubling accounts, he starts a private investigation of the church. Kahn exposes Jones' abusive behavior, fraudulent activities, and tricks to deceive his followers, including his healings and prophecies.
He would slip little old ladies Quaaludes, which are potent tranquilizers, and knock them out, and then they would awake with a cast on their leg. And then people telling them, oh, you fell down, but it's okay. You broke your leg, but Father's gonna heal you. They had no recollection of this. So they would wheel these women into the church, and with great fanfare, Jim Jones would cut off their cast and then command them to get up and to walk and to dance. And there is a young reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle there, Marshall Kilduff. So he starts snooping around, and he starts having some of the people who left the church come and talk to him about some of these things that are going on behind closed doors that Jim Jones doesn't want anyone to talk about.
Jim Jones' influence with the media blocks the San Francisco Chronicle from publishing the story, but Kilduff manages to sell it to New West magazine. Soon the authorities start to get interested in the case. Feeling that his castle of cards is crumbling, Jim Jones decides to make one final move. He takes as many followers with him as he can, leading them to a gruesome fate. Jim Jones' influence with the media blocks the San Francisco Chronicle from publishing the story, but Kilduff manages to sell it to New West magazine. Soon the authorities start to get interested in the case. Feeling that his castle of cards is crumbling, Jim Jones decides to make one final move. He takes as many followers with him as he can, leading them to a gruesome fate.
But we have no place to go now. It's either to go to someplace like Cuba, our promised land, which we are wanting to get out of the conflict between the capitalist and the socialist world, into a free socialist territory in the third world.
A few years earlier, the socialist government of Guyana offers plots of land to international organizations with the goal of increasing the production of food in the country. Jim Jones takes this opportunity to expand his church abroad and flee from California.
It was at that time that then we started to see a few members, as he called them, the pioneers, advancing ahead of the church members to start building and construction of what was going to be known as Jonestown.
It would be a place where children could run free, not have to worry about crime. We'd be able to leave our doors open. We could build the community as a community, grow our own food. Our seniors would be taken care of. Just this place of peace and harmony that we didn't have in the States.
I wish I can be glad for you guys, everybody over there. They come here in the Promised Land. I really do like it. It's fun over here. It's really good.
The grand exodus of us was in 1977. I came in March of 1978, and then everything came to an end.
As his followers arrive in Guyana, they soon understand that their expectations are far from the reality.
The first thing they asked us is for passport and money. So we told them we didn't have any money. And they kept begging for the passports. Look, Yolanda, this is just for safekeeping. Don't you trust us?
There's not enough housing for everyone. Old people are living in triple bunk beds, not 2 bunk beds, but 3, and having to climb up and falling down. And, you know, some of the cottages don't even have doors yet.
I was assigned to a cottage with maybe about 20 other guys in bunk beds, and there was a loft. I fortunately got to live in a loft with another guy, and I was assigned to the orchard crew that worked on the orchards. And we worked from sunup to sundown, like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., something like that in the fields.
Plumbing and sanitation are primitive, with cold showers and no proper toilets. The heat, mosquitoes, and tropical diseases quickly start to take a toll. Also, the thin jungle soil is too acidic to plant American crops, limiting the variety and quantity of food.
We never saw ground beef, we never saw steaks, we never saw eggs, we never had juice. We didn't have any of that. The only person who had it was Jim Jones. He had all of it.
And then manipulation starts.
I saw that the families being broken up. I saw little children reporting their parents. Jim Jones' philosophy was that the sickest relationships are the family relationships. So you might be raising someone else's children. So the children were separated from their parents and raised by others. And it was just basically a technique to break the family unit so that loyalties to family would be transferred to loyalties to him.
He says if they don't like living in Jonestown, they can swim home because he's not paying their airfare back to California. Yeah. What are you going to do? There's one ham radio. That's their sole line of communication with the outside world. Nobody can use it but Jim Jones, So there was a PA system in Jonestown, and whenever Jim Jones' voice was heard over the PA system, everyone was expected to be quiet and listen.
So absolute anarchy, and I won't have it. So you'll see me. And the lights get low. And for a long time you're going to see me when the lights get low. But I will sneak up on you at any night, any hour.
It ultimately came down to when Jim Jones opened his mouth, everything was a lie. He didn't want us to read the newspapers. We didn't have newspapers when we were in Jonestown either. The news came from him, and it was fake news, but he was selling it as the real deal.
The government was going to build concentration camps to put black people in, that the CIA was going to come and get us, take the children. They knew that we were revolutionaries or communists or socialists. And there were factual things that were happening at the time that would support some of that thinking.
In Jonestown, you had to be engaged. There was no way out. So you either had to mentally prepare yourself to try to pretend like everything was okay, because paranoia was rampant.
Oh, you would never tell anyone verbally that you knew something was wrong. You'd be afraid to even tell your mate.
If you disobeyed the rules, you were exhibiting counter-revolutionary behavior that was a threat to the cause of socialism. And so people were encouraged to report anything that was against the rules, which included the worst thing you could probably say was, I want to get out of here, or I don't like this place, or disagree with Jones in any way whatsoever.
And the corporal punishment became more severe over the years. And we went then beyond beatings into literally what would be considered what you would do to a slave. It was just the worst, horrible type of cruelty and punishment that a human being could expect or accept.
And in the worst case scenarios, with people who complained or stood up to him, he would drug them with Thorazine, this very powerful sedative used on patients in mental hospitals, and keep them in what he called the special care unit, where they would disappear from Jonestown and just be drugged around the clock, just zombified with medicine.
The temple also had a house in nearby Georgetown where members of the congregation would deal with the new arrivals and supplies.
Debbie Imes had been the procurer for Georgetown, and she had been getting all of the food and whatnot and doing a pretty good job of procurement. But Jim Jones decided he wanted me to try my hands at it, so he had me primarily stationed in Georgetown.
At that house also lived a group of young, attractive women who would be known as the PR girls. Their aim was to get involved with Guyanese officials in order to get some influence with the local politicians.
When we got to the airport, it was very interesting. And they said, "Are these your suitcases?" And we're like, "Yeah." "What's your nature of business?" I said, "People's Temple Missionary Agricultural Project." "Oh, okay. They didn't even really search our suitcases like you should in customs. They just let it go through. The next thing I knew, there was like 3 big crates coming through. And they said, "These are yours too?" And I'm like, "No, that's not ours." And then Debbie gave me this funny look like I was supposed to acknowledge and accept that these were our boxes, our cargo boxes. So they came through with our stuff, and they never even opened the crates or anything. They just let it come through.
Guns were being sent down to Jonestown in false bottom crates, so they would get through the inspection process.
Ultimately, The guns are used to reinforce the sense of external threat.
There was the thing called the 7-day siege, where he orchestrated events that would appear to be threats from the outside, like rifle shots in the jungle. Well, one of his security guards or his sons was out there shooting to make it appear like there was the enemy without, that was out there in the jungle waiting for us. Because there were supposedly enemies out in the jungle, sometimes our meetings in the pavilion were surrounded with security guards with rifles. And the rifles were supposed to be pointed out to the jungle, to the enemy outside, but you had a feeling that they were really there for you.
And then comes the suicide drills.
The suicide drill was called the White Night, and it was a coming together of the community to talk about an unsurmountable challenge that is happening to the community, and that no other solution was possible except to commit revolutionary suicide.
He had them line up and he served them unsugared Flavor Aid and told them that they were going to commit revolutionary suicide. A couple people responded like, hell no, I'm not going to do this. They were sent to the special care unit and pumped full of drugs.
It seemed like just more theatrics. I never imagined that it was ever going to happen, that it was just another way of him trying to control people.
After finding that his people's temple is under investigation, Jim Jones flees to Guyana and establishes a commune with 1,000 of his followers. But after isolating them from the world, and with his drug addiction getting worse, Jones increases the indoctrination and abuse of the members of his cult.
So then I started writing letters and taking them to the post office and advising my family members of things that were going on.
But 2 weeks pass until Yolanda Williams hears from her family.
I'm sitting out on the veranda of the house, and a little cab pulls up. And this cab driver gets out, and he says, "Is this the place where there's some United States citizens?" And I looked at him and I said, "Why? Who wants to know?" Out of the cab comes my mother. And when I ran in my mother's arms, all I could say is, "Don't give him your passport, don't give him your cash, don't give him your passport, don't give him your cash. Please, 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 promise me you won't. She's like, "Girl, shut up, I'm not giving them my stuff." I said, "Just please, please, Mother, we gotta get out of here, we gotta go."
Concerned relatives were the family members of people back in California who started to suspect when they didn't hear from their relatives in Jonestown, or when they received letters that were very stiff and seemed almost dictated.
In May 1978, Debbie Blakey, one of the PR girls in Georgetown, changes the course of events.
At one point, she is back in Jonestown visiting her mother, and she hears Jim Jones talking about revolutionary suicide, and she gets really scared, and then decides to go to the U.S. Embassy in Georgetown and tell them what's going on. They help her get back to California, where she has a press conference and tells the world. The Chronicle runs this saying Jim Jones is planning to kill everyone in Jonestown. What happens after that is that the concerned relatives get very frightened. They ask Congressman Ryan to go down to Jonestown and see if their relatives are okay.
That was on November 17th. And then the siren goes off and we run to the pavilion. And then we realize that those are the concerned relatives and Congressman Ryan, and he's gonna be there that night. So Diane says to me, "We're leaving tonight." I said, "Okay."
They had a show, dancing, singing, a special meal for them, an orchestrated event, and we were trained and rehearsed on what we were supposed to say, all the same answers, which, if you think about it, if you're interviewing a whole bunch of people and everybody says exactly the same thing, it would be a bit suspicious, don't you think? But that's what we did.
And Congressman Ryan addresses the crowd and he says, "It looks like you all are happy here. Everyone I've talked to has said the same thing. You don't want to come back. You enjoy it here." And there is a round of deafening applause.
Congressman Ryan's impression can't be further from the truth. But only one member of the crowd dares to make a move in a very discreet way.
Don Harris, one of the reporters, had been circling around the circle, and I had slipped him a note to help us get out of Jonestown. And so then he dropped it, little kid saw it, I picked it up, I said, "Oh, you dropped something."
So Diane said, we're not going to go tonight because Vern passed a note. So everyone's watching.
Group decides to leave the following morning.
So we started walking up the hill, and I was waiting for the bullet because I thought there's no way they can't see us from below. There's no way they can't see us. And I'm carrying Jakari. I'm on the tail, on the left. And we keep walking. And so by the time we started getting deeper into the jungle, into the bush, we could hear the guards at the guard shack. We were that close, we could hear their voices.
But Jim Jones and his guards have other concerns on their minds.
In the middle of an interview between Don Harris and Jim Jones, he pulls out this note from Vernon Gosney and he hands it to him and he says, "Well, what do you make of this?" And then Jim Jones, you can see his face fall.
People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about liars? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us. Bill, we will bother nobody. Anybody wants to get out of here can get out of here. We have no problem about getting out of here. They come and go all the time. I don't know what kind of game. People like publicity. Some people do. I don't.
Congressman Ryan was in the pavilion talking to more people that wanted to leave because the momentum was growing. People were getting more courage about wanting to leave. There were people coming that wanted to get into the truck, and we had to get out of there because Congressman Ryan's life was in danger. Someone came and tried to cut his throat. So we all loaded up into the dump truck. The dump truck was allegedly stuck in the mud until Congressman Ryan came running out of the pavilion with some blood on his shirt.
The dump trucks managed to get to the Port Kaituma airstrip, where Congressman Ryan's entourage and 15 defectors board the two small planes. Vernon Gosney climbs into a small 6-seat Cessna next to a defector named Larry Layton.
We went taxiing down the runway to take off, and as the plane was getting ready to take off, a tractor trailer pulled out in front of us and cut us off, and the plane went off to the side. And at that time, I heard the shooting.
The same People's Temple security guards who had escorted the trucks to the airstrip opened fire, killing 5 people, including Don Harris and Leo Ryan. He becomes history's only U.S. congressman to be killed in the line of duty.
To Larry, who was sitting next to me, and said, "They're killing everyone, they're killing everyone." And then he pulled out the gun and he shot me, once on each side.
Although badly wounded, Vernon Gosney and the other passengers managed to subdue Larry Layton.
At this time, their adrenaline is running. I have no pain, I have nothing, I'm in a total altered state, everything is in slow motion, and I'm just surviving. So I get out of the plane and I run to the jungle. I remember looking and seeing all the blood and I thought, oh, I'm gonna die. And then I blacked out.
We walked for hours and hours. So finally it's dark and we're still on the road and we're hearing this train come back. And this time Richard says, we're gonna get on the train if it stops and we're gonna find somebody to take us to a payphone so we can call the U.S. Embassy. And that's what happened.
These henchmen roll back into Jonestown, and Jim Jones calls everyone to the pavilion and says, "This is it. If one of us goes down, we're all gonna go down." So suddenly this is the moment that they have been training for, the moment of revolutionary suicide.
This is a revolutionary suicide. This is not a self-destructive suicide. So they'll pay for this. They brought this upon us. If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace.
I can imagine many of them were hoping that it was just another drill. So when their children then, who were given the cyanide first, started going into convulsions and frothing at the mouth because it's a horrible death, they realized that this was the real thing.
Don't be this way. Stop this hysterics. This is not the way for people who are socialist communists to die. No way for us to die. We must die with some dignity.
You can hear them crying, you can hear them shouting no. You can hear them dying, you know. Sorry.
Still, some of the people confront Jones, trying desperately to move him off his decision.
I will never believe to this day that 900 people just willingly stood there in line and waited for their dosage of poison. And it's not a believable scenario.
Forensics experts who are dispatched to Jonestown find bodies that had been jabbed in the back with poison needles, suggesting that they refused to follow Jones' orders. They weren't given an alternative to death. Survival was never an option.
It was murder. It wasn't suicide. These people had no choice that night. It was death by guns, the guns that were now trained on them by Jim Jones's henchmen, or it was death by poison, which they thought would be an easier way to die. And they didn't drink the poison. It was forced down their throats by a madman who destroyed the most beautiful ideals we have as humans.
Families who had been forced to live separately for so many months could die together.
Now, Jim Jones, after watching this horrible death, witnessing it, he took the coward's way out and he shot himself.
Still, Jim Jones could not have pulled off this massacre on his own. His inner circle took part in the months of planning. The mastermind of this final solution was the young community doctor, Larry Schacht.
Because that's what Jim Jones told this small inner circle to do. Figure out how to kill everyone in Jonestown. We don't have enough bullets, so be creative. And while he was researching that option, he came across this medical journal where there was an article about saving a boy who had overdosed on cyanide.
What happened to them could have happened to any one of us. No one was exempt from it, because ultimately the leader of People's Temple had a gift. I call it now the gift to gab, but he could be whatever you needed him to be at the time. He was a Jekyll Hyde.
No one was dragged to Jonestown. They went voluntarily, regardless of the circumstances. Some were forced to go because they had nothing else left, but others, I'm not sure. So I had to forgive him, and that was the only way I could forgive myself.
People should remember about the people in Jonestown that they were a beautiful mosaic of people that for a brief time weaved together in a dream for a better world.
I live for the 900 people that can't be here to tell you what it was truly like. But in the end, as long as we're able to talk about it, they live.